It was still dark over Paris on the morning of Saturday, March 28, 2026. In the 8th district, a short walk from the Champs-Élysées, 3 teenagers were moving toward the French headquarters of Bank of America. They were carrying a homemade incendiary device, a phone to film themselves, and the promise of up to €1,000 waiting for them once the job was done. They believed they were about to pull off something that would put fear into an entire country. They were right about one thing. This would make headlines across Europe. But they were wrong about everything else. Because within hours, all 3 of them were in custody. An entire network was starting to unravel. And the plot they thought would terrorize a nation ended up doing the exact opposite. It handed French investigators the clearest map they had seen in years, straight into a shadow war being fought on their own soil. If you like breakdowns of the schemes that fall apart the moment they touch reality, take 1 second right now and subscribe. This channel covers the collapses, the failures, and the operations that backfire every single week. Now let's get into how 3 kids with a petrol can walk straight into one of the biggest counterterrorism operations of the year. To understand why this happened when it happened, you have to understand what kind of spring it was in Europe. A little over a month earlier, American and Israeli strikes had hit Iran, and the region had slid into open war. Energy markets went into a tailspin. Oil prices swung violently. European governments started quietly preparing for shortages, and every intelligence service on the continent braced for the part that always comes next. When 2 states go to war in the open, the quieter war spills outward. It shows up in other countries, on other streets, aimed at softer targets that have nothing to do with the front line. That is the pattern history keeps repeating. The main event happens far away, but the damage lands on ordinary buildings full of ordinary people, thousands of miles from the actual fighting. And in this war, the economic front was never far from anyone's mind. The strikes on Iran had not just triggered a military response, they had shaken the machinery that keeps the modern world running. When a conflict threatens the flow of oil out of that part of the world, prices do not drift, they jump. And every economy that depends on cheap energy starts doing math it does not want to do. Traders panicked. Governments that had spent years telling voters the worst was behind them suddenly found themselves drawing up emergency plans again. In that climate, a Western financial institution stops being just a building where people work. It becomes a pressure point. Hit it, and you are not only frightening pedestrians, you are poking at the confidence that the entire system runs on. Whoever pointed those teenagers at a bank understood that a cracked window on the right building can rattle markets in a way a cracked window on the wrong one never could. Paris, in those weeks, was a nervous city. Security was already tight, intelligence services were already stretched, and the sense that something was coming hung over everything. And into that nervous city, a video appeared. On March 23, 2026, a little-known group calling itself Hi posted propaganda online. The full name translates roughly to the Movement of the Companions of the Right Hand of Islam. Almost nobody had heard of them before that spring, but in a matter of weeks they had claimed a string of attacks on American, Israeli, and Jewish targets across Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, and beyond. And this particular video did something specific. It did not speak in vague threats. It named a target. It pointed directly at Bank of America's Paris headquarters in the heart of the 8th district. French police were tipped off about that video within days. So when we talk about this plot backfiring, understand that, in a sense, it was already compromised before the teenagers ever laced up their shoes. The people meant to stop it were already watching the exact building the attackers had been sent to hit. The hunters knew where the trap was being set before the people setting it ever arrived. Now, here is where the story turns from geopolitics to something much smaller and much sadder, because the people carrying out this plan were not hardened operatives. They were 3 boys, aged 16 and 17, with no criminal records at all. Not one of them had ever been in serious trouble. A few weeks earlier, they had been ordinary teenagers somewhere in the Paris region, going to school, scrolling their phones, living the same lives as millions of other kids. And then, a man in his early 20s from a Paris suburb came looking for them. That man is the connective tissue of this entire case. He was not some ideological mastermind who had spent years in training camps. According to the prosecutor's office, He had a single prior conviction, and it was a drug case from 2025. He was, in the language investigators would later use, exactly the kind of person this network was designed to recruit. Someone with a foot in the criminal world, someone who needed money, someone who would not ask too many questions about who was really giving the orders. A middleman, not a believer. He told investigators that he had been approached on a social network by a person presenting themselves as an intermediary. This intermediary, he claimed, framed the whole thing as a personal vendetta and then arranged for the device itself to be delivered to him. He would provide the muscle. Someone he had never really met would provide the weapon and the target. He was, on his own account, a hired hand who had been handed a bomb by a stranger on the internet and told where to point it. And the muscle he chose was children. Over the nights of March 26th and 27th, he recruited the three teenagers. The offer was blunt and transactional, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 euros each. In exchange, they would plant the device outside the bank, light it, and film the scene so the act could be shown off afterward. That was the job. Place it, ignite it, record it, get paid. No manifesto, no cause explained in detail, just a task and a price. Think about how that offer lands on a 16-year-old. There was no talk of martyrdom in that moment, no years of careful grooming, just cash. A week's worth of an adult salary for one night of work. Investigators would later note that all four suspects denied any terrorist intent. The adult said he thought it was a vendetta. The teenagers said they had been pressured, but there was one detail the minors could not explain away. They admitted that they knew the target was not a residential building. They knew they were being sent to strike a business in a busy district in the middle of a major European capital. Whatever they told themselves about why, they understood what they were carrying and where it was going. And this is where the Bank of America plot stops being a strange one-off and starts looking like a symptom of something France has been quietly panicking about for years, because French prosecutors have been raising the alarm about a sharp rise in exactly this. Teenage boys, some barely into their teens, turning up in terror investigations. The National Anti-Terror Prosecutor's Office has laid out the numbers, and the trend is steep. A few years ago, only a handful of minors were charged with terror offenses in a given year. Then, it was 15 minors in 2023, 18 in 2024, and by the 1st of July in 2025, they had already reached 11. These boys were aged from 13 to 18, and they came from all over the country. Not one region, not one background, everywhere. What magistrates keep pointing to is a common thread running through these cases: an addiction to violent content online. Boys radicalizing not in mosques or meeting halls, but alone in their bedrooms, on gaming platforms and chat apps, fed a diet of the most extreme footage the internet can serve. One French teenager convicted over a plot targeting far-right bars told investigators it all started when he was 13, playing a video game and talking on a gaming chat platform. He described watching video after video, drifting between different extremes until a sense of injustice curdled into something that felt to him like a mission. Another boy, just 14, was allegedly planning to blow up an embassy. Different ideologies, different targets, but the same machinery underneath. A vulnerable kid, a screen, and an endless supply of content designed to make violence feel like meaning. So when a man in his 20s went looking for teenagers to carry a bomb to a bank, he was not reaching into some rare hidden population. He was fishing in a pool that French investigators already knew was dangerously full. The recruitment worked because the ground had already been prepared, years in advance, by an online environment that quietly hands teenage boys a reason to want to hurt someone. The device they were handed was not a firework prank. French prosecutors described it as an improvised explosive built around a 5-liter petrol can bound to a large pyrotechnic charge. What made it stand out was the scale. Investigators said it was the most powerful device of its kind that had ever been identified in France up to that point. This was not meant to make noise and scare a few pedestrians. Placed against the base of an office tower in the right spot, a device like that is designed to do real structural harm and to hurt anyone nearby. The people who built it were not sending a warning shot. They were sending a weapon. So on paper, from the point of view of the people directing this from a distance, everything was in place. A named target, a serious device, a local fixer, 3 expendable teenagers with clean records who nobody would immediately connect to an international network. It looked, on paper, like a plan built to work and built to be untraceable, layers on layers, so that if anything went wrong at the bottom, the people at the top would simply vanish. And then it collapsed almost the instant it touched the real world. The plot was thwarted before dawn on that Saturday, foiled in the hours when the attackers thought the city was asleep and nobody was watching. But the city was watching. Paris, like every major capital, is blanketed in cameras. The very same modern surveillance the plotters were counting on to spread their footage online became the thing that buried them. Investigators pieced the whole night together through CCTV footage, through phone data, and through police interviews. Every movement through those streets had been recorded from a dozen angles by machines that never blink. And here is the cruel irony at the center of this case. The teenagers had been ordered to film themselves. That instruction, meant to turn the attack into propaganda, meant to create a trophy for the people paying the bills, became a self-made confession. They documented their own participation. They carried phones that logged where they were, when they were there, and who they were talking to. Every step designed to make the attack louder online was, at the same time, a step that made the arrests easier. You could not have handed the police a better evidence package if you had tried. The plan's entire promotional strategy doubled as the prosecution's opening argument. Line up the timeline, and the whole thing looks less like a daring operation and more like a countdown that was always going to hit zero on the wrong side. The propaganda video went up on March 23rd. Police were reading it within days. The teenagers were recruited over the nights of March 26th and 27th, which means the fixer was still scrambling to assemble his team at the very moment investigators were already circling the target. And then, before dawn on March 28th, it was over. From the video that named the bank to the arrests that gutted the cell, the entire lifespan of this plot was a matter of days. The people directing it thought they were moving in the shadows. In reality, they were racing a clock that the other side had already started. Within a very short span of time, French authorities had 4 suspects: the adult and the 3 minors. A 5th person was arrested and questioned as well, but was later released for lack of sufficient evidence. The 3 teenagers who thought they were about to become infamous were instead sitting in front of anti-terror investigators, watching their own footage played back to them. The video that was supposed to make them legends became the reason they were caught. That is what backfiring actually looks like. Not a bomb that fizzles on the pavement. A plan that produces the precise opposite of its goal. The intent was terror and anonymity. The result was a fully mapped cell and a nation put on alert against the very people who ordered it. Everything the plotters wanted, they lost. Everything they wanted to avoid, they walked straight into. But to really understand why this matters, you have to zoom out from 3 teenagers to the machine that sent them. Because French investigators did not believe for a second that this was really about a personal vendetta. They suspected Haï, the group that had named the target in that video days earlier. And Haï fits a pattern that security services across Europe have grown very afraid of. The group appeared to be brand new, surfacing only through that spate of attacks on American, Israeli, and Jewish targets. But the method underneath it was not new at all. Western security sources described a model that looked painfully familiar, a model previously linked to Iran, in which a hidden hand recruits ordinary criminals and petty offenders to carry out attacks, so that the trail is almost impossible to follow back to whoever is really giving the orders. The people at the top never touch the weapon. They never visit the target. They just send money down through the layers and wait to see what happens. There is a specific history here. Back in 2018, there was a bomb plot in Paris that was tied directly to Iranian intelligence, and it failed. According to a senior Western diplomat, that failure taught a lesson. After getting caught operating directly, the approach shifted. Instead of sending professional intelligence officers who could be identified and traced back to the state, the work got farmed out to paid criminal gangs, layers of intermediaries, cash instead of ideology, local nobodies instead of trained agents. If one link gets caught, the chain above him stays hidden. Deniability, bought cheaply, one desperate recruit at a time. It is outsourcing, applied to terror, and the cover story is part of the design too. Remember, the fixer told police he had been sold on a personal vendetta. That is not an accident. That is the script the recruit is handed on purpose, because a person who thinks he is settling somebody's private grudge behaves very differently from a person who knows he is a soldier in a state-linked campaign. He talks more freely, he takes fewer precautions, and if he is caught, he genuinely cannot betray the people at the top, because he never knew who they were. The lie is not just a convenience, it is a security measure, protecting the sponsor from the very person carrying out their attack. Everyone at the bottom is kept in the dark on purpose, so that the truth cannot leak upward even under interrogation. You can see the same fingerprints all over the map that spring. Haï did not just surface in Paris. It had already claimed attacks aimed at American, Israeli, and Jewish targets in several countries, and French prosecutors were openly comparing notes with investigators in Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands. Same kind of targets, same kind of throwaway recruits, same shadowy sponsor that nobody could quite pin down. This was not one plot. It was one visible tremor from a fault line running under the whole continent. That is exactly the shape of the Bank of America plot. An anonymous intermediary online, a small-time local criminal in the middle, three teenagers at the very bottom who had never even met the people whose war they were fighting. And French prosecutors made clear they were not treating this as an isolated French problem. They said openly that they were coordinating with counterparts in Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands over a wave of Haï-linked attacks that had swept across Europe that same March. One video, one target in one city was just a single node in something continental. The same playbook running in parallel in country after country. Now let's talk about the target itself, because the choice of a bank was not random. This is where the plot connects to something bigger than any single building. In the middle of a regional war that had already sent energy prices lurching and rattled the global economy, the plan was to strike an American financial institution in the center of Europe. Not a monument, not a government office, a bank. A symbol of the Western financial system standing on one of the most famous avenues in the world. The target was chosen to say something, and the location made the choice louder. The 8th District is not some quiet corner of Paris. It is one of the most watched, most photographed, most heavily policed stretches of the entire city, wrapped around an avenue that millions of tourists know by name. An attack there would not have been a local story. It would have been on every screen on the planet within the hour, precisely because of where it happened. That was the point. The people behind this were not shopping for a place where a fire would do the most physical damage. They were shopping for a place where the images would travel the furthest. A burning American bank, meters from one of the most recognizable avenues on Earth, would have been worth more to them than the destruction itself. They were not really buying an explosion. They were buying a photograph they could send around the world. The message being sent was economic. Hit the money. Make the West feel that even its banks in its safest capitals are not off limits. And the reaction shows that the message was at least partly understood, even in failure. In the days after the plot was foiled, French authorities did not treat it as a one-off arrest and move on. They raised security across Paris. Police reinforced protection around religious sites, cultural sites, diplomatic buildings, and, tellingly, economic venues across the whole metropolitan region. The state read the plot correctly. Someone was trying to make the financial heart of the West feel exposed. Then came the reaction that says the most. Other American banks in Europe looked at what had almost happened and quietly told their people to stay home. Goldman Sachs told its Paris staff they could work remotely. Citigroup did the same for employees in Paris and in Frankfurt, calling it a precaution. Sit with that for a moment. A plot that never detonated, carried out by teenagers who were arrested within hours, still managed to empty out floors of some of the most powerful banks on Earth in 2 different countries. The device failed. The intimidation, for a few nervous days, partly worked. That is the strange asymmetry of this kind of attack. Even when it loses, it costs the other side something. And yet, even that has to be weighed against the total picture, because the operation as a whole was a defeat for the people who launched it. The 4 suspects were placed under formal investigation, which in the French system means judges believe there is enough evidence to keep digging, and all 4 were put in pre-trial detention. They face allegations tied to manufacturing, transporting, and handling an explosive device and attempting to destroy property as part of a terrorist organization. French law is careful here being placed under investigation is not a guilty verdict, and these cases can take years before they ever reach trial or get dropped. But the network's goal was never a courtroom outcome. Its goal was a burning building and a viral video. It got neither. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, publicly commended the authorities for thwarting the scheme. And the reason it could be thwarted so cleanly comes back to that opening irony. The plotters relied on a modern city, and a modern city watched them. They relied on teenagers who could be paid off cheaply, and teenagers, it turns out, leave a very loud trail. They relied on a plan of layers and deniability, and the bottom layer collapsed the moment it stepped into the light. Every strength they thought they had turned into the exact weakness that sank them. So what do you actually take away from a story like this? The uncomfortable part is not the bomb. It is the recruitment. This whole case only worked as far as it did because someone, somewhere, correctly bet that you could find teenagers with no record and no ideology who would carry a serious device to a target for the price of a used phone. That is the real weapon in the modern version of this shadow war. Not the explosive, the pipeline. The quiet math that turns a nervous kid and a cash offer into a delivery system for someone else's agenda, hidden behind so many layers that the person at the top never has to get their hands dirty. And that pipeline is the part that does not get arrested. The three boys are in detention. The middleman is in detention. But the intermediary who reached out on a social network, the people who built and shipped a record-setting device, the group that filmed a video naming the target and then sat back to watch, most of that structure is still out there, still fishing in the same pool of bored, angry, broke teenagers that French prosecutors keep warning about. This plot failed. The model that produced it did not. There is something almost coldly efficient about how it is designed. The sponsor risks nothing. The intermediary is a screen name. The fixer is a small-time criminal who can be replaced by next weekend. And the actual hands on the device belong to kids who are legally children, who can be paid off for the price of a phone, and who will take most of the punishment if it all goes wrong. Every layer is built to protect the one above it. The value of a human life in that structure is measured in a few €100 and a promise. And the horror of it is not that it is sophisticated, it is that it is cheap. You do not need a state's resources to run this. You need an internet connection, a little cash, and a target list. That is why it keeps spreading across borders. It costs almost nothing to try, and even a failure like this one still buys a few days of fear and a few empty bank floors. For the price of a used phone, someone had rented a headline, and that quiet math is the frightening part. The lesson French authorities seem to be drawing is that the fight cannot only happen on the night of the attack. By the time three teenagers are walking toward a bank in the dark, the real damage has already been done. Weeks or months earlier, in the quiet spaces online where a kid first got convinced that hurting strangers would give his life a shape. Stopping the bomb is the easy part, as this case proved. Stopping the recruitment is the war nobody has figured out how to win yet. The three boys at the center of this thought they were about to become somebody. Instead, they became a case study, a warning to every service in Europe about how these networks now operate, and, if there is any mercy in it, maybe a warning to the next teenager who gets a message from a stranger online promising fast money for one simple night of work, because the people who send that message are not sharing the risk. They are exporting it. And when it goes wrong, and it did go wrong, they are not the ones who get caught on camera in the 8th District before sunrise. The plot against Bank of America was meant to be a demonstration of reach. In the end, it became a demonstration of how these things fall apart. A serious device, a famous target, an invisible sponsor, all of it undone by 3 phones and a city full of cameras. The people who planned it wanted the whole world to see the fire. Instead, the only footage anyone will ever watch is the recording that put 3 teenagers in a cell. If this breakdown was worth your time, subscribe and stick around. There is another story waiting on your screen right now about a scheme that looked unstoppable right up until the moment it wasn't.